Welcome, everyone. So grateful to have you for our Lunch and Learn. We are so excited to have Indigevisor with us today, and they are going to be talking about how to help organizations become better treaty partners and what social workers need to know to begin this process. So with that, I want to invite everyone to first join with me in a land acknowledgement. You can see on the bottom right, placenames.mapdev.ca or Google, but we like the placenames.mapdev.ca website because you can zero in on the specific town where you are located and learn the correct Mi'kmaq name for it, and also learn how to pronounce it, which is especially awesome. So please feel free to join with me in the chat. But first, just take a moment. If you have a window, feel free, and a view, please take a moment to look outside at this beautiful land where you are located. If you do not, take a moment to close your eyes and perhaps call to mind a special part of unceded Mi'kmaq where you are located, and just to, maybe it's your favorite place to go. It might be the beach, it might be your backyard, it might be a park, it might be a hiking trail, but wherever you feel most connected to the land, just take a few moments for gratitude to acknowledge the land where you are. And please join with me. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Unama'ki, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act, and they remain active to this day. Let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. Let us take this moment to also reflect on the ways in which settler Canadians continue to benefit from the ongoing occupation of Indigenous lands to the detriment of Indigenous peoples. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers commits to translating this acknowledgement into action by seeking to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially those regarding education. We commit to doing what we can to becoming better treaty partners. We commit to learning and to unlearning. We are all treaty people. So how does this impact what we do and how we do it? And how will it guide our work together today? Let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent and racist and intersectionally oppressive ways that colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. And when we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. May our session today help us in this. With that, I am so excited to invite Brooke from Indigevisor to join us. And I am going to be screen sharing, and we will also have an opportunity to just make sure that everyone is here. And I believe that there will be someone else that'll be joining us as well, but is held up right this minute. So we'll send them lots of loving energy. And we're just so grateful to have Brooke with us. So Brooke, I'm going to screen share and I'm going to put myself on mute. And we are so grateful for you and your team to learn. And you're going to be able to share a little bit more about who you are and the awesome work that your organization is doing, because it's really cool for us to get to learn from you. So we're grateful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Jalasi, welcome to the Indigevisor Lunch and Learn, where we can discuss advance and reconciliation and moving forward together. So to the next slide. Yep, the overview. So we'll talk a bit about our story, how Indigevisor began, the objective for this lunch and learn, what we do, our team, our experience in doing this work, our phased approach, the calls to action, ways to implement and action those calls to action, guiding principles for Indigenous engagement and ways to adhere to those principles, and how social workers can become better treaty people. And we are all treaty people, and then questions. Next. So a bit on our story. Indigevisor was founded in 2019 by Nadine Bernard, our COO, when she noticed that there was a gap in support available for clients in the construction sector. Organizations didn't know where to start, so she saw the need for being able to provide that space to unpack truths through successful communication and engagement strategies. In 2022, Indigevisor began rapidly growing, hiring its first employee, me, and becoming an incorporated business. Since the beginning of 2023, the Indigevisor team has been expanding and now covers multi-sectors such as construction, maritime shipping, defense and military, aviation, forestry, tourism, information and cultural industry, and more. We established 2 offices, one in Jabukduk and the other in Unamagi at the New Dawn building, which was formerly known as the Holy Angels building. Next. So the objective for this lunch and learn is to educate and inform you all about our work and how social workers can become better treaty people. Our purpose is to bridge clients and communities for economic reconciliation and through strategic and equitable partnerships, and we act as the conduits to bring about that meaningful change. Next. So who we are and what we do. Indigevisor is a national advisory corporation with a very distinct purpose, bridging clients and communities for economic reconciliation through strategic and equitable partnerships. We're owned and operated proudly by Indigenous women. And our vision is clear: promoting sustainable success for Indigenous communities through innovative and inclusive partnerships. We want to be the trusted partner that industries turn to when they are seeking to build equitable business cultures. So we serve as a vital bridge between our diverse clientele and the Indigenous communities that we support here in Mi'kma'ki and throughout Canada, Turtle Island. Through our network of independent advisors, we gain access to a wealth of sector-specific expertise and insights born from these lived experiences. This multifaceted approach empowers us to deliver transformative solutions tailored to meet the unique needs and aspirations of both businesses and Indigenous communities. We are committed to facilitating meaningful change, and we focus on the integration and the operationalization of Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada TRC calls recommendations, with a special emphasis on Call to Action 92. We are dedicated to empowering our Indigenous women, uplifting our youth, and strengthening community capacities. It is our aspiration to make a lasting impact that positively benefits the next 7 generations. We harness our collective experience, strengths, and wisdom. We're not just service providers, we're advocates, allies, and facilitators. Our mission is to support and actualize in truth and reconciliation across Turtle Island, recognizing and elevating our shared experiences and insights as we provide Indigevisor services. Next. Here is our team. So there's me, I'm the COO. There's Randy, who will be joining us hopefully soon. She's the office manager and marketing manager. And then there's Nadine Bernard, our CEO and founder, and Natasha Moore, who's leading business development. And then those are kind of like our roles where we have to have those roles be incorporated. And then we have our passion roles, which is economic environmental justice advisor for myself, policy evaluation and reconciliation advisor for Randy, procurement and equitable opportunities advisor for Nadine, and community engagement and public relations advisor for Natasha. And we also just we don't have her headshot here, we're still waiting on it, but she just joined us earlier this week, Angela, and we're really, really happy to add her to our team. So, and yeah, we don't, typically it's all hands on deck. Like, we kind of all do the work. So yeah, next. So a few initiatives we're working on as a multi-sectoral business. We've become involved in several projects throughout Mi'kma'ki. A few of those are the Cape Breton Healthcare Redevelopment Project, where they're working on the 4 hospitals, Atlantic Science Enterprise Center in Moncton, the Everwind Fuels Green Hydrogen Point Tupper Project, various ports across Atlantic Canada, almost all of them, including Halifax and St. John, and Halifax Stanfield Airport. So they're looking to add Indigenous inclusion into their design of their airport. So we'll be working on that, and a number of other diverse clients and projects. So it's just needed everywhere. Next. So in our experience, many of our clients don't know where to begin their truth and reconciliation journey, or don't know how to make it impactful within their organizations. Our preliminary assessments help us to identify where work needs to be done and allows our clients to see where work needs to be done. So our organizations often believe they're doing a good job. However, we often notice that there's so much more that can be done within organizations that goes unnoticed. For example, when it comes to policies, there's often a discrepancy between the colonial ways of knowing versus Indigenous ways of knowing. A good example of this would be restorative justice. In your policy for somebody who might be you know, there might be some issues with your employee, like instead of doing the harsh way of dealing with that person, you can use a restorative justice kind of approach. So like a talk-in circle, or so just there's other ways to go about that. We love the idea of an Indigenous Advisory Council. Whenever we can recommend it, we do so. They can provide direct and effective perspectives into all aspects of your organization, and it's good to know that leaving your minimal Indigenous employees to provide knowledge about their experiences for the benefit of your organization is harmful. Yeah. And next. So our approach, beginning with the preliminary assessment, it allows our clients to see where the organization is at in the reconciliation journey, showcasing the gaps in which they are currently operating. We kind of go through the board, Indigenous inclusion in your board of directors, how your policies, recruitment and retention, your senior management, what you've done so far in terms of cultural awareness training and sensitivity training, and kind of going through literally all of the operations. And then which leads us into our, we'll create a recommendations plan or a recommendations report, and then it turns into, so sorry. Just It's my dog. So it's a reconciliation plan, as you'll see on the next slide. It's a 3-phase approach. It's to help organizations take their journey of truth and reconciliation honestly, truthfully, and slowly. Jumping into engaging with communities or interacting with communities because of a requirement should not be the way we choose to engage and interact with communities. We want these organizations to understand the necessity of engaging with communities beyond requirements. History, colonialism, and broken promises has impacted the ways Indigenous communities perceive organizations. So instead of jumping directly to the end product, first there must be an understanding of how history plays a role in relationship building today. So taking your reconciliation slow, truthfully, and honestly allows for the opportunity to be a better treaty person. I think you could stay on that slide, sorry, on the phase, yeah. So in our approach, this is the reconciliation plan. In phase 1, the focus is on cultural literacy. So through our workshops, participants not only learn about Indigenous cultures, but also build the skills to establish respectful relationships. And in phase 2, it's building on phase 1, and it integrates Indigenous perspectives into your operational strategies, ensuring they're consistently respected and represented. And then in phase 3, our services are orientated towards cultivating respectful and culturally attuned strategies for engaging with Indigenous communities, stakeholders, rights holders, and title holders. This involves the formulation and execution of engagement strategies, identifying key community stakeholders and rights holders, conducting engagement sessions along with the support for implementation of your recommendations report at every organizational level. The prime objective is to ensure that communication and engagement are carried out with the utmost respect and understanding of Indigenous cultures and perspectives. So each phase is molded by the insights from the preliminary assessment, ensuring a tailored and effective approach for your organization. With us, you're not just adopting an action plan, but embracing a long-term commitment to reconciliation. So on to the calls of action. The first one is we call upon the federal, provincial, territorial, and Aboriginal governments to commit to reducing the number of Aboriginal children in care by 1, monitoring and assessing neglect investigations, 2, providing adequate resources to enable Aboriginal communities and child welfare organizations to keep Aboriginal families together where it is safe to do so, and to keep children in culturally appropriate environments regardless of where they reside. 3, ensuring the social workers and others who conduct child welfare investigation are properly educated and trained about the history and impacts of residential schools, and ensuring that social workers and others who conduct child welfare investigations are properly educated and trained about the potential for Aboriginal communities and families to provide more appropriate solutions to family healing. And then requiring that all child welfare decision makers consider the impact of residential school experience on children and their caregivers. And then next, call to action 22, we call upon those who can affect change within the Canadian healthcare system to recognize the value of Aboriginal healing practices and use them in the treatment of Aboriginal patients in collaboration with Aboriginal healers and elders where requested by Aboriginal patients. Call to action 23 is we call upon all levels of government to A, increase the number of Aboriginal professionals working in the healthcare field, B, ensure the retention of Aboriginal healthcare providers in Aboriginal communities, and C, provide cultural competency training for all healthcare professionals. In Call to Action 24, we call upon medical and nursing schools in Canada to require all students to take a course dealing with Aboriginal health issues, including the history and legacy of residential schools, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous teachings and practices. This will require skills-based training and intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. Ways to implement, adhere to these specific calls to action. You can check how neglect cases are being handled, give enough support so that Indigenous kids can stay with their families or in places that respect their culture, train social workers about past issues with residential schools, teach social workers how Indigenous communities might have better ways to help families heal, make sure decisions about kids consider the effects of past residential schools on them and their families, encourage the Canadian healthcare system to value and use Indigenous healing methods. If an Indigenous patient wants it, work with Indigenous healers and elders to make it happen. And then get more Indigenous people working in healthcare, keep these workers in Indigenous communities, train all health workers about Indigenous culture and sensitivities, learn about Indigenous health and history, including problems with residential schools, understand important documents about Indigenous rights, such as UN DRIP, calls to justice, calls to action, treaties in your territory, learn how to work well with different cultures, solve disagreements, and understand human rights and anti-racism. So for guide and principles for Indigenous engagement, I typically go over this with every client, especially in the case that they are going to engage with, or they're looking how to appropriately engage with Indigenous people. So the first principle. So the first guiding principle is respect for sovereignty. To do this, acknowledge and respect the self-governance of Indigenous communities, their rights to make decisions and laws concerning their people and territory. By recognizing the sovereignty of Indigenous people and their communities, this upholds their autonomy and dignity. To adhere, you would engage with each community in a way that respects their autonomy and decision-making processes. The second guiding principle is recognition of traditional rights. Recognize and respect the Indigenous people's traditional rights and their deep connection to their ancestral lands and waters, their traditions and their cultural heritage. By respecting these traditional rights, you're honoring Indigenous people's historical relationship with the land and acknowledge their rights to use and manage their territories. To adhere, you would consider these rights in all decision-making processes and seek ways to mitigate any potential negative impacts to your project, programs, or initiatives. Next guiding principle is commitment to mutual benefits. Commit to a partnership approach where benefits arising from projects, programs, or initiatives are shared equitably with Indigenous communities. Commitment to mutual benefits ensures that Indigenous communities will share in your project's success and promote economic and social development. To adhere to this, you would explore ways to ensure that benefits such as employment, procurement, and revenue sharing are equitably distributed among communities. You might not be able to change procurement, but you can still look at employment or other processes everything is a process. So the next guiding principle is transparent communication. Commit to open, honest, and regular communication, ensuring that all relevant information is shared in a timely and accessible manner. This helps build trust and ensures that all parties have the necessary information to make informed decisions. To adhere, you would proactively share project updates, program updates, and information and would be responsive to requests for additional information. Collaborative decision-making. If you are aiming for a participatory approach where Indigenous communities have a meaningful role in decision-making processes related to the project or program, you're doing it right. Involving Indigenous communities in decision-making respects their rights and ensures that their perspectives and concerns are considered. To adhere, you would involve Indigenous representatives in key decision-making meetings and processes. And then there's respect for cultural diversity, which recognizing and respecting this diversity leads to more effective and respectful engagement. To adhere to this, you would seek to learn and understand the cultures of the communities you engage with, and would ensure that your engagement practices are culturally sensitive. So for example, in our community engagement plans, we include very comprehensive community profiles about each community that you're intending on engaging with. So the next is continuous learning, commitment to ongoing learning about the history, culture, and rights of Indigenous communities, and applying this learning to enhance your engagement practices. Here, you would provide cultural awareness training. From the community, you would seek to learn from the communities themselves. And then conflict resolution, committing to addressing any conflicts that may arise in a respectful, timely, and solution-oriented manner. Addressing conflicts promptly and respectfully ensures trust and cooperation between parties, promoting smooth and productive collaborations. To adhere, you would utilize a conflict resolution process that involves consultation with involved Indigenous communities to ensure a solution that is in best interest of all parties. And consent, so strive for free, prior, and informed consent in all interactions, recognizing that Indigenous people have the right to give or withhold their consent to a project that may affect them or their territories. FPIC is a specific right that pertains to Indigenous people and is recognized in UNDRIP, which Canada has endorsed. So to adhere to this, you would seek FPIC before initiating any activities that may impact Indigenous peoples, communities, or their territories, and you would respect any decisions made by the communities, altering the plans as necessary. And for accountability, holding ourselves accountable to these guiding principles, will regularly assess and improve practices based on feedback from Indigenous peoples and communities. Accountability ensures that you're upholding your commitments and allow for continuous improvement in engagement practices. This principle solidifies the commitment to rights, needs, and expectations of Indigenous communities. To adhere to this, you would monitor and report on your performance and adhering to these principles, and will make necessary adjustments based on feedback from communities. You would also commit to transparency in your practices and would invite external audits or reviews if needed. That's a really important one. How can social workers become better treaty people? So you use the calls to action to direct your internal policies and practices. You dissect them, understand the implications, and think of the ways you can use them. Recommend training and professional development opportunities to your organization. So suggest a preliminary assessment or reconciliation action plan to understand where your organization is at and how you can progress your truth and reconciliation journey. Learn about the communities in which you work and have connections with or visit. Learn about the land and treaty you currently live and work on. Adhere to the guiding principles for Indigenous engagement and integrate decision gates. So on to integrate and decision gates. The concept of decision gates can be thought of as checkpoints or junctures in a process where decisions are evaluated against a specific criteria to ensure alignment with guiding principles. In the context of Indigenous engagement, these gates act as critical moments, ensuring that each guiding principle is being respected and adhered to. It could be sort of thought of as quality control. Just make it. And then at each decision gate, action and intentions are actions and intentions would be evaluated against the guiding principles. So these gates ensure that respect for Indigenous communities are woven into the fabric of the entire process from start to finish. So rather than in phase 2 or phase 4, you're actually, you know, getting them in phase 1. For example, before final, if you go to the 2 next slides, sorry. For example, before finalizing a location for a project, a decision gate is reached where respect for sovereignty and recognition of traditional rights are evaluated. This ensures that the location isn't infringing upon Indigenous territories or rights. With these gates in place, you're not just adhering to the guiding principles, but you're ensuring their consistent and proactive integration at every stage of the process. There's a process for almost everything in which these principles can be applied. They're not just static statements, they're dynamic living concepts that should influence every step of the process undertaken. By intertwining these principles with your processes, you ensure that your daily actions, big or small, reflect the values and standards that you are hoping to achieve. The next slide, ways to integrate decision gates. So if you have case assessments before diving into an intervention or forming a plan for a client, a decision gate can be set to ensure cultural sensitivity, recognition of personal rights, and respect for individual sovereignty. This is especially vital when working with diverse populations or communities. And community engagement. Before initiating community-based projects or programs, decision gates can be used to ensure the engagement respects and recognizes the rights, traditions, and values of the community members. And resource allocation. When deciding on the allocation of resources for clients or communities, gates can be established to ensure equitable distribution based on the guiding principles of justice, fairness, and respect for individual rights. Any training modules or development initiatives for social workers can have decision gates to ensure that they're aligning with the ethical standards and guiding principles. With new policies or guidelines are rolled out, decision gates can ensure that they do not infringe on the rights of people they serve and respect. When partner with other agencies or organizations, a gate can be used to ensure that guiding principles are not compromised and that the collaborations are built on mutual respect and recognition. And then after an intervention or initiative has been rolled out, gates can be set up during the feedback or evaluation process to ensure that the guiding principles were upheld and to identify areas for improvement. We are all treaty people. So treaties weren't just pieces of paper, but were and still are living agreements that allow different peoples to share land and grow together in peace. Both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples are beneficiaries of the stability, prosperity, and cultural richness that these treaties fostered. Treaty people, next slide. Treaty people refers to all individuals living in areas where there were treaties that Indigenous people signed. This includes both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. For Indigenous peoples, this meant protection of territories, where treaties delineated areas where Indigenous rights to land, water, and resources were recognized. It ensured peace. That these treaties often included clauses that ensured protection against encroachment or hostility from settlers and access to new tools and trades. So the next slide. For non-Indigenous settlers, this meant safe settlement. With treaties in place, settlers could establish homes, farms, and businesses without fear of conflict. This meant access to land and resources, which allowed for resource extraction, agriculture, and infrastructure development. And then it also meant cultural exchange. So yeah. And that is it. Questions?
So thank you so very much. And I'm excited that actually we have Randy who is with us as well. So I'm going to add that spotlight. And I was screen sharing, so I didn't get a chance to see people's questions or comments, but I see that there are a couple of them here. So I'm going to answer some of those questions, and please feel free to add a few more either in the chat or the question section. We do want to make sure that you are able to have that. So just as a component for, of course, this meets the requirement for truth and reconciliation education that we have in place, or just general formal professional development if you've already done that. You do not need a copy. I mean, you do not need a certificate for participation, but we are going to be sending in our newsletter tomorrow all sorts of information about what you need to share or not. Now, this is very awesome. And so first of all, just Walala and Brooke for beautifully sharing and educating us. I'm gonna, since I'm talking, let you all see me as well. So thank you all so much, Walala. And this was like such a beautiful overview, and the concepts, just laying it out on this timeline. I think a lot of our members are really grateful. There was a request for a copy of the presentation. This is being recorded, so you will have it on YouTube as well. So the first question is, who do you recommend to be on an Indigenous advisory council for an organization? So since our members are in so many organizations across unceded Mi'kmaq, and hopefully can begin to advocate for those organizations to be better treaty partners, who would you recommend to be on that council? And also, like, should those positions be paid, or how do we like compensate for the emotional labor? So those are some of the questions that are coming. Feel free to put more questions in the chat, everyone.
Yeah, so typically for Indigenous advisory committees, it would be it would be a team of a committee of knowledge keepers, elders. It depends on where the organization is. So you would want an Indigenous advisory committee that's representative of the territory that you're in. Yeah. And usually if you want help to get one going, you know who to ask.
I also think it's like especially important to have people on the committee who are the communities you're planning to engage with and discuss with and do work with, because those are the first voices that you'll be hearing, and they'll really be able to guide your journey in engaging and communicating with communities.
Thank you, Will Ellen. So I'm going to just put back, if this is okay, there were a couple of slides that were, I think, especially impactful for our members to be thinking about, because it talks about the process and the stages that are needed. So because of that, we have, for example, we have a lot of members that might want to jump into this work because we are so passionate and so angry about the injustice, and we don't always think about like the organizations we're with, and how, for example, what you said about how it needs to be a phased approach. So it begins with our own cultural awareness training. What does allyship look like? What is a blanket exercise? Before beginning community engagement, lest we jump to phase 3, but some members in our organization might potentially cause harm. So that was, I think, there was so much in each of your pieces that I feel like we could spend hours on each of the things that you said. But what are some strategies that our members, like maybe there are no, for example, Indigenous employees or people in an organization, and our members are attending this lunch and learn, and they're really excited and they want to work on advocating? What are some strategies to help people who don't think it's even a problem begin to understand that they might need to think about it?
Well, I think it's a new thing now where immigrants coming into Canada have to take a course on Indigenous history. Is that right, Randy? So I feeling like one step to that would be, and what I've seen other organizations do, is kind of have like an intro module to Truth and Reconciliation in Canada, which typically will lead to that person wanting to learn more. Usually our blanket exercises are really what gets people to start that like mind shift, because that's where they actually can get the empathy to be in Indigenous person's shoes and see and feel how that has impacted us. And then also with the talk and circle afterwards, like they're just amazing. So blanket exercises are very, very recommended. And even if you took one like a year ago, 2 years ago, like they're really great. Like they're healing, they're enlightening, and that's something I'm thinking of. And then also, I guess just like making it important in your organization is another big one. Like other people have to know that it's important to senior management and such. So.
Thank you, Alala. And Randy, welcome, first of all. We're so
Thanks.
glad that you are able to join. And we know that, you know, as social workers ourselves, we're often called to crises at the last minute. So you're amongst friends in terms of understanding that. So Shalasi, and we're grateful that you're here. And please, is there anything that you would like to add to that question? Or
I think Brooke nailed it. I think for even like recruiting Indigenous employees, it's really important to understand the context of what they lived with, the generational impacts of residential schools. And that ties back to the blanket exercise. Unless you can understand those impacts, it is hard to effectively hire Indigenous employees and give them a safe space to grow, learn, and build their capacity. So, yeah.
One question that came up is specifically about the appreciation to Brooke for mentioning that turning to, for example, one or two Indigenous employees and saying, you educate us, can actually cause harm. So what are some potential reactions or suggestions? Let's say we have members who go to a meeting later today or tomorrow and they see their boss say, oh, blah, blah, blah. What are some possible responses or suggested reactions that our members could use in order to be better allies and advocate for a better process?
Sorry, what was your question? The beginning part of your question?
Let's say we have a member that goes to their office and they hear their boss say, oh, we've got like, we'll ask John to come and do this training for us. What are some possible reactions that you would recommend that our members perhaps?
I would recommend, like, do you think that's our place to do that? Should we hire an external organization? Just kind of ask those questions and make people think about it. It's not to be right or wrong, it's to empathize and understand and teach each other. Yeah.
I was going to say external trainers are especially important too, because it also brings a neutral perspective into your workplace. If you have your employee who already works at the workplace, there might be a barrier in the amount of emotion that comes out during a blanket exercise or during a training. And they might be even a bit nervous to speak about their own experiences, whereas external trainers are usually trained and have that experience of delivering and being able to share their story in a way that is impactful, but also isn't shared directly among colleagues that, who knows, maybe they had a negative interaction with one before. So
yeah. And also external trainers are likely doing the work because they want to be, and that's why they are there to hire. For ourselves, we recognize we're all at different areas of our healing journeys. So we're highly respectful of that within our team members, and we help each other get through every day pretty much. So we've been in organizations in the past where we've been expected to do that work solely, and it's not fun.
Yeah, and being able to be an outside person sometimes allows you to say certain things that are going to be different and heard differently. One of the things that you shared that is, I think, also really impactful. I mean, everything was, but the phase gate of process and the concept of decision gates, or checkpoints in a process. And I wonder if you can say a little more about what that might look like, and potentially could social workers intervene to invite wherever they are to pause in any process that we're in and say, oh, here's an idea. Okay, gate one. Okay, where even if we've moved to step 3 and people are looking at the business case, like how do we intervene at any given step? What are some strategies that you would recommend?
For me, I feel like integrate and decision gates is kind of the solution, because we often hear that people just don't know how to implement or to truthfully live by these concepts. But it's not rocket science. And that's like not to be offensive at all. It's like if you are in a, like you have a process and you ensure that you have like these, and I guess we don't like the term checkbox, but to be honest, it's in decision gate. So if you haven't met those requirements, like if you haven't engaged with, Indigenous people properly, then you need to circle back and restart the thing, figure out what went wrong, how to fix it, try again before you actually move on. And the more you move on through your processes, the less and less you're going to, run into problems.
One of the things that we sometimes see is that sometimes we realize we did something wrong. And then we have like shame that floods us, and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. And so then, as human beings, we don't always react well to shame. What are some tips maybe that you have for how to address situations like that? Like maybe we're in a large group setting and we hear or see someone do something that we can see has caused harm. What are some recommendations that you might have of things that work really well or really don't work well?
I would say first, try not to feel shame. Shame is a really horrible feeling, and I don't think anyone should feel it. But we do. And I think acknowledging it, if it was something directly to someone, acknowledge it and apologize for it. And if it was something within a project or initiative or a program, again, acknowledge it, try to fix it. If you can't, then lessons learned, and try to learn from your mistakes. We all make mistakes.
I think a big thing with that too is like the feeling of shame. It also often uprises when we don't know something. And that's when we start to feel it. So it's really important to maybe identify like, hey, I'm feeling this way, and it's because I didn't know this particular thing and it came out in a way that harmed someone. You can look at that as what's the word I'm looking for? An opportunity to learn and dive into why didn't I know it? And you don't know what you don't know is what I've been hearing Nadine say a lot today. Because if you're not willing to learn it, you're just not going to know it at all. And it'll just keep repeating and going over and bringing up the shame feeling again too.
one of the things that we sometimes talk about is that it just like a fish doesn't know it's in water because it doesn't know what life is like without water. So too, we live in systemic racism, colonialism, in ways, intersectional violence world, so much so that we can't fully even imagine not to. And yet when we make something, we make a mistake, we sometimes personalize it because of this like personal blame. Human beings are responsible instead of looking at larger systems. So how can we begin to help our the organizations we're in see how they are potentially replicating larger systemic forces in ways that are not blaming? I think that's probably like our last question for the day. So if you have any thoughts about that, or just some recommendations that you would like our members to be able to take with them, we welcome your final thoughts on that. And yeah.
I think even being guided by the 7 grandfather teachings, to have the courage to say something and to be honest about what happened, and like being brave and addressing it maybe to someone higher in that position, even if there is a fear of coming forward and a backlash. I think maybe a whistleblower policy might be in place, and might be a safer place to do so if that feels more comfortable. But I think saying something is really important, because you're not going to know it's wrong unless someone says it's wrong. So
yeah, acknowledging. The other thing, gosh, I was going to say something. Really trying to understand microaggressions, unconscious bias, like you were speaking of earlier. Those things are very large in workplaces where Indigenous people are feeling like it's toxic workplace culture. And many, even Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, like it's doing better. It's trying to do better. It's knowing that this exists and that, okay, we need to do this. We need to make this new policy. We know that traditionally these policies are made this way, but instead we're going to, we're going to have an external consultant come in and help us write these policies so that we're ensuring that we're representative of all people, kind of thing. So just more cultural awareness training, bringing in the right people, and just keep moving forward, like keep the momentum going.
Lalayu, we are so grateful to you both for being here and sharing some of your wisdom and experience, but also like helping us see how all of the stuff that we might be learning on an individual level can fit into a larger process. And there is a comment in the chat that it's just so awesome to know that your organization even exists, not to mention all of the wonderful work that you're doing with the different organizations across unceded Mi'kma'ki that are now beginning to learn, so that we can partner with them in continuing to advocate for truth and reconciliation across Turtle Island. So deeply grateful for the work you do, deeply grateful that you shared some of your knowledge and wisdom with us and helped us begin to organize how the different steps can happen, how we can intervene at any step along the way. A reminder of some of the important work that we all need to be learning. And so grateful to our awesome members for everything that you do to help us move forward from where we have been to where we all need to be. So with that, Lalayu, thank you all.
Thank you so much.